Welcome back to our channel where we share updates and untold stories about Catherine, Princess of Wales and her royal family. Today we bring you some significant news. 5 million ago, Princess Anne catches Camilla altering Queen Elizabeth's will. King Charles is in shock. A crisis of extraordinary magnitude has emerged from inside the historic confines of Windsor Castle, profoundly unsettling the British monarchy. A covert royal audit has escalated into accusations of forgery, an intense power struggle among senior royals, and the shocking disclosure of a clandestine recording left by the late Queen Elizabeth II. The controversy focused on a purportedly fraudulent version of the Queen's will, allegedly designed to advantage Queen Consort. Camilla has reportedly brought King Charles III's nascent reign to a critical juncture and revealed fractures within the House of Windsor more severe than any since the demise of Diana, Princess of Wales. Insiders inside the palace requesting anonymity, owing to the delicate nature of the issue, describe an atmosphere of profound mistrust and upheaval. The sequence of events assembled from many insider testimonies illustrates a monarchy contending with a significant betrayal uncovered within moments before it might have been irrevocably inscribed in the official record. The tip-off and the neglected chamber. The hush at Windsor Castle was distinct on that fateful morning. It was not the silence of awe, but the dense, electrified stillness that precedes a tempest. A team of royal auditors convened secretly in a great drawing room of the castle for a private assessment of the sovereign's land when a sensitive communication was delivered to Princess Anne, the Princess Royal. The information, as per a person acquainted with the transaction, came from a former legal secretary to Queen Elizabeth II, a man famous for his decades of steadfast allegiance. He referenced an anomalous item recorded in the estate index, an 11th-hour amendment to the Queen's will that contradicted his recollection of the final sealed papers. Princess Anne, often seen as the steadfast and pragmatic guardian of the monarchy's integrity, acted without hesitation. Disregarding convention, and without prior notice, she discreetly departed from the pre-audit formalities. Utilizing a combination of architectural expertise and instinct, she traversed a tiny serpentine path that, as reported by castle personnel, had been unused since prior to her mother's coronation. Concealed under the lavish splendor of Windsor's state apartments between strata of stone and gloom was an overlooked archive room. The atmosphere indoors was dense with the aroma of antiquated paper and dust. Oak bookcases burdened by the weight of centuries of royal documents adorned the walls. With deliberate intent, her gaze traversing the worn labels, the Princess Royal identified the item of her inquiry, a folder inscribed Royal Testament, 2022. It seemed too pristine. The leather was too pliable and the gold leaf was very luminous. Within, her revelation disrupted her renowned equanimity. There was not one, but 2 testaments. The first document, including the Queen's signature in ink that was starting to deteriorate, was dated many months before her death. It was the paper that the royal family had long considered to be her definitive statement. The other, meticulously placed in a newer protective sleeve, was recently inked, handwritten, and strikingly contemporary. Anne's pulse raced as she positioned the 2 papers next to one another on a dusty lectern. The signatures were virtually similar at first glance, Elizabeth R. However, beneath the low light of the room, the discrepancies became evident to one familiar with her mother's handwriting. The pen's weight, the little pause in the curves of the E, the pressure on the parchment, it felt amiss. It was an excellent replica, although it lacked the essence of the original. Subsequently, the names emerged. The legacies to Prince William, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, and Prince Harry were evident as anticipated. However, the name of the Queen Consort appeared throughout the new text with worrisome regularity. Estate's priceless relics and important ceremonial privileges had been deliberately redistributed. The Crown's assets seemed to be intentionally skewed in Camilla's favor, bestowing upon her a degree of power and authority that was much above her constitutional responsibility. Anne's hands, often calm, trembled not from fear, but from a surging, frigid rage. She was acquainted with her mother. Queen Elizabeth II was exacting deliberate and, above all, ardently safeguarding the monarchy's fragile equilibrium. This rewrite did not reflect her voice. It was another's ink endeavoring to alter history. With her back straightened and eyes narrowed in determination, Anne recognized that this revelation could not be postponed for the auditors. She needed to notify Charles. She needed to alert William. This deception must be halted before it is revealed. However, as she pivoted to exit the vault, a gentle shuffle from the hallway halted her abruptly. A figure loomed in the subdued light at the door. Upon entering the room, the light illuminated her face, validating Anne's gravest apprehensions. The individual in question was Queen Consort Camilla. She had a fountain pen in her hand. A confrontation in the vault. The quiet that enveloped the two most formidable ladies in the royal family was more perilous than a shout. The silence was acute, the atmosphere charged with unarticulated allegations. Princess Anne remained unperturbed, her stare fixed on Camilla with a penetrating intensity capable of stripping varnish. Camilla, for her part, exhibited an expression of poised, somewhat theatrical astonishment. "Anne, you startled me," she said, her tone a well-measured tool of diplomacy. "I was only confirming that everything was organized prior to the auditor's arrival." Anne was absent for charades. Her voice, infused with a rage tempered by years of royal discipline, pierced the stagnant air like a shard of glass. "Misconstrued. You are positioned here with a fountain pen over my mother's testament. That is not a misconception, Camilla. That constitutes tampering." For the first time, Camilla's poise seemed to waver. She retreated slightly, selecting her subsequent words with meticulous accuracy. "I was protecting her last desires. Adjustments were made. Private matters she planned to establish, but had not finalized before her death." Her uncomfortable confidence in the answer did not persuade Anne. Her gaze descended, fixating on the pages that Camilla had been perusing. At that moment, she saw that the ink on one of the signature lines had not yet completely dried. The obvious luster of a newly inscribed name, Elizabeth R., served as a devastating accusation. It was excessively flawless, excessively current. Anne's suspicions solidified into conviction. This was not only a modification, it was a deliberate, continuous scam with the perpetrator positioned directly before her. Their impasse was disrupted by the arrival of a royal security officer at the chamber door, evidently notified by activity detected by the castle's internal sensors. "Your Royal Highness, Your Majesty, is everything satisfactory?" he inquired, his eyes oscillating between the two ladies. Anne pivoted, anticipating the beginning of the procedure. Before she could speak, Camilla lifted a soothing hand. "It is perfectly acceptable, officer," she said gently, her tone infused with the power of her new position. "The Princess Royal and I are finalizing a private subject. We are well here." The officer paused his training, instructing him to defer to the senior-ranking Princess Royal. However, the Queen Consort's trust was unequivocal. He offered a brief nod and withdrew into the hallway. Anne's blood became icy. Since when did palace security prioritize Camilla's account above hers? The episode starkly illustrated the power transfer that the forged will aimed to legitimate. The atmosphere became dense with unvoiced inquiries. Anne, always forthright, advanced. "I am reaching out to Charles," she said, her tone unequivocal. "He is entitled to be informed of the situation before it progresses further." At this moment, Camilla's facade ultimately shattered. A little glimmer of genuine terror ignited in her eyes. "Please," she murmured, the words suspended in the atmosphere as if a revelation. "Refrain from informing him. Not at this time. Not at this time." The two words provided Anne with all the affirmation she needed. There was no yet about probable treason against the crown. The Queen's will had been modified, and the Queen Consort had just confessed her desire to keep this information from the King. Upon reflection, Anne concluded that Charles would not be her first contact. She envisioned an individual far more inflexible, a person who had cherished his grandma with intense affection. An individual has everything at stake should this fact remain concealed, someone whom Camilla had consistently and tragically misjudged. This will not endure. The conference occurred in a secluded sitting room at Adelaide Cottage, away from the scrutiny of the main castle. The mood was grave when Princess Anne placed the two wills on an antique coffee table in front of her nephew, the Prince of Wales. One was aged and fragile, its ink diminished. The other was strikingly immaculate. Prince William required no explanation. He devoted significant time to his grandma during her last weeks at Balmoral. Her intellect was keen, her principles unequivocal, and her aspirations for the monarchy's future evident. She spoke openly on her legacy, the crucial role Catherine would assume, and the utmost significance of continuity and veracity. She had never shown any intention to amend a single phrase in her will, much less to significantly benefit an individual whose position in the family had always been for the Queen a matter of obligation rather than devotion. His fingers, quivering slightly, followed the counterfeit signature. The boldness of it was offensive. It was a bold fake, although it lacked the gravitas and historical significance of the Queen's handwriting. Camilla's name often appeared in association with land grants, invaluable royal treasures, and ceremonial privileges that had been passed down through centuries in the straight line of succession. William's voice, upon finally articulating, was subdued and quivering with barely restrained fury. "She is altering the narrative," he said to Anne, his tone laden with incredulity, with ink and avarice. Then, more loudly, as if the walls themselves needed testimony, he said, "This shall never endure." At that moment, as if prompted, Camilla entered the room. Her timing was deliberate, an apparent effort to mitigate the repercussions. Her visage was a deliberate facade of apprehension and outrage. "William, you are exaggerating," she said, her tone incisive. "This is a significant misinterpretation. You are exhibiting hysteria." Her choice of words exacerbated the situation. William sprang to his feet, his eyes aflame with a rage that rendered her speechless. "Hysteria!" he retorted, his voice reverberating in the confined space. "You falsified my grandmother's last wishes. You have transgressed a boundary that no one has ever had the audacity to approach. This is not a misunderstanding. It is deception." Princess Anne intervened, providing a stabilizing influence amid the intensifying conflict. "We must maintain our composure," she cautioned William, her tone resolute but measured. "This is not the appropriate location. Not at this time." However, William was beyond the threshold for a tactical withdrawal. His anger extended beyond mere testamentary matters. It pertained to a behavioral pattern he had seen for years, the covert machinations, the discreet marginalization of individuals embodying the Queen's traditionalist faction, and the understated erosion of his grandmother's legacy during the nation's sincere period of mourning. "If you believe this can be concealed, you are gravely mistaken," he said, his eyes locked on Camilla. "The involvement of Scotland Yard is necessary. This constitutes a criminal issue." Anne paused. Engaging the authorities would precipitate a public crisis of unprecedented magnitude for the monarchy in a century. It might undermine public confidence and disrupt the institution they sought to protect. "Let us locate your father first," she implored softly. "He is the monarch. He merits awareness prior to the crown transforming into a courtroom spectacle." William remained unresponsive. He exited the room in a fit of rage, his furious strides conveying a more articulate response than any debate. However, the royal corridors provided no quick solutions. Upon eventually locating King Charles, he was not situated where they had anticipated. He was accompanied. The monarch's confidentiality, The atmosphere in the king's private study was laden with an inescapable tension that no monarchy could alleviate. King Charles III seated himself next to one of the Queen's most esteemed legal advisers, an old gentleman renowned for his impeccable discretion. In the king's grasp was a time-worn envelope, slightly yellowed at the edges, inscribed in his mother's unmistakable handwriting, "To be opened only by my successor." Charles gazed at the letter as if it were an explosive device. Upon the entrance of William and Anne, it became evident that Charles had more knowledge than he had previously disclosed. Anne, her patience depleted, abandoned diplomacy. "You have possessed that letter since the funeral," she said, her voice piercing the profound hush. "What is the reason for its closure?" Charles refrained from responding promptly, his gaze concentrated on the envelope. "Mother preferred it remain unread unless—" He paused, the implicit stipulation lingering in the atmosphere. Anne approached, articulating her remarks with measured intent. "Unless what, Charles? Unless someone revealed the truth you already suspected," Camilla, having entered the study after them, finally spoke, her voice devoid of its previous firmness. "You failed to comprehend the intricacies." William confronted her abruptly. "No, you failed to comprehend," he said. "We have reviewed the testament. We are aware of your actions." He presented the counterfeit papers. "This is not your legacy to compose." His gaze shifted back to his father. "Peruse it. Peruse the correspondence." Constrained not by coercion but by the inescapable burden of reality, the king ultimately acquiesced. He shattered the wax seal with shaky hands. The room was silent. Within was not only guidance, it was a demonstration of prescience and conclusiveness. Queen Elizabeth articulated the concepts of equilibrium obligation and the inviolable trust that must remain unaltered. She clearly designated Catherine, the Princess of Wales, as the symbolic successor to her private estate, particularly enumerating antiques inherited from Queen Victoria's lineage, royal journals, and personal mementos intended only for a future queen consort in the direct line of succession. Camilla's name was conspicuously and deliberately excluded from these particular bequests. It was not a slight. It was a deliberate decision rooted in centuries of tradition rather than contemporary feeling. The Queen's candid remarks reverberated across the gathering. Anne stood upright, her doubts confirmed. William's jaw clenched as he perused the phrases that resonated with his grandmother's subdued dialogues throughout her last days. Initially, Charles remained silent. His quiet was no longer a defense. It was shattered. He had been aware intrinsically. He experienced the conflict between his allegiance to his wife and his adherence to his mother's last wishes. In safeguarding one, he almost compromised the other. However, before anybody could really comprehend the truth, the legal advisor cleared his throat. "There is another, Your Majesty," he said quietly, extracting a second smaller sealed packet from a concealed pocket in his briefcase. This document was to be unveiled solely in the occurrence of a direct dispute regarding the primary will. The authentic will, and a public controversy. The letter had altered the dynamic, although a lingering shadow of uncertainty persisted for Princess Anne. She remembered an enigmatic remark her mother had spoken on a stroll at Balmoral years prior. "You can never completely trust the vault. Certain truths require more concealed locations." At the moment, it seemed to be an intriguing statement. At this moment, it resembled a map. Subsequently, Anne re-entered the Queen's private study, unaccompanied. Her gaze wandered to an imposing image of the Queen positioned over the fireplace. Below it rested a substantial ceremonial wooden chest, long regarded as more of a decorative piece than a practical safe. Driven by instinct, she discovered a concealed release panel near the base. A metallic sound reverberated throughout the quiet chamber. Within, encased in royal blue velvet, was an additional folder. Upon opening it, her breath became constricted in her throat. This was the moment. The Queen's conclusive and last will, dated and signed a few weeks before her death, is neither a copy nor a draft. It was incriminating. This paper was clear. Catherine was designated as the only successor to Elizabeth's extensive collection of personal jewels. Equally catastrophic was a legal provision that had been completely excluded from the counterfeit document. Camilla was to retain the title of Queen Consort only without any financial power or symbolic dominion over the royal estates beyond what was lawfully prescribed. It was a calculated firewall, Queen Elizabeth's ultimate measure to safeguard the institution against exploitation. Anne presented the text before an urgent session of the Royal Council. This occasion will entail no postponements. Handwriting specialists verified the signature's authenticity immediately. The paper, the ink, and the precise wording, each element conformed to the Queen's established style. No one in the room, not even Charles, could refute its validity. The real intention was now obvious. Before the palace could devise a plan, Camilla, in a moment of utter terror and desperation, committed a grave miscalculation. She or an authorized representative disseminated a counterfeit version of the will to the media. It detonated across the British media scene. Tabloid front pages blared with headlines announcing the Queen's true last wishes, depicting Camilla as the cherished and designated heir to Elizabeth's legacy and fortune. The action aimed to establish a public narrative so compelling that the palace would be compelled to acquiesce. It resulted in a stunning failure. The royal press office was caught off guard. Inside hours, the genuine will was disseminated by a rival party inside the palace to combat the forgery. Simultaneous comparisons inundated social media and news platforms. Signature analysts, legal authorities, and royal commentators critically dismantled Camilla's account. The most egregious instance of royal forgery in contemporary history, said a notable lawyer on television. Demonstrators have begun assembling outside Buckingham Palace advocating for openness and accountability. Catherine, at her first public appearance since the breach, sent a subtle but impactful message. She participated in a charity event adorned with one of Queen Elizabeth's most renowned and cherished brooches, an item recognized as part of the late monarch's personal collection, now verified by the authentic will to be solely owned by Catherine. She remained silent. The brooch conveyed everything that was necessary. The Queen's ultimate appeal. The aftermath was nuclear. Camilla was no longer seen as a misunderstood individual. She was regarded as the architect of a scheme that jeopardized the stability of the crown. King Charles, compelled to address the crisis, had a meeting with his wife, from which, according to accounts, he emerged noticeably distressed. However, the ultimate conclusive strike was still forthcoming. Concealed among the Windsor archives in a box designated only with the Queen's personal cipher was a cassette recording. It was inscribed in her distinctive handwriting, "Private," to be accessed if inquiries arise. In solitude, during the late hours, Princess Anne activated the playback. Her mother's voice, lucid, intentional, and very personal, pervaded the room. "I have observed its gradual development in silence," the Queen said, her tone laden with melancholic insight. "I have spoken little since I believed that those closest to me would get the significance of quiet. However, I must articulate my thoughts now, if only for the sake of future events." She expressed her apprehensions on the evolving dynamics inside the palace. She referred to Camilla explicitly, not with animosity, but with significant concern. "Her influence expands beyond my expectations," the Queen said. "Although I acknowledge the life Charles has selected, I cannot permit emotion to supersede structure." Subsequently, utterances emerged that would alter the course of events irrevocably. "I made a vow," she said softly to Diana. "Long before the world recognized the extent of her anguish, I pledged to her that the future of this crown would be entrusted to a lady who exemplified both duty and elegance. The individual is Catherine. Should any iteration of my will emerge that unjustly benefits others, rest assured it does not represent my intent, nor does it reflect my legacy." Individuals attempting to alter my intentions for their benefit do not uphold the monarchy. They self-serve. Do not allow them to succeed." The tape ended. Anne remained still. It transcended mere proof. It became her mother's last entreaty. The ultimatum and its consequences. The door to the king's study closed with a finality that resonated throughout the palace. William stood before his father holding the tape player. He started playback. The voice of Queen Elizabeth, an apparition unable to be muted, permeated the space between them. Charles sat pallid, the burden of his mother's words, his wife's treachery and his own culpability overwhelming him. Upon cessation of the recording, the quiet was complete. William advanced, his voice lacking warmth, but as incisive as steel. "If you fail to act promptly, I will intervene. I will disseminate this recording. I will disclose the original will. The world merits understanding her genuine intentions." "What effect will that have on your stepmother?" Charles inquired, his tone devoid of resonance. "It no longer pertains to her." William said, his eyes steadfast. "It pertains to her." He gestured towards the speaker. "It pertains to the commitment you observed her establish, and subsequently permitted another to obliterate." The ultimatum was unequivocal. By dawn, the formal announcement was disseminated. The final validated will of Queen Elizabeth II will serve as the authoritative document for the crown. The palace affirmed that Queen Camilla would maintain her ceremonial title while relinquishing all official decision-making responsibilities inside the institution. Her power had been depleted, resulting in only an empty designation. Camilla exited the palace by a special eastern gate, vanishing from the inner circle as quickly as she had previously risen. Days later, when the dust settled, a last package from Balmoral arrived at Buckingham Palace, addressed only to Princess Anne. Within was a journal opened to an entry dated August 31st, 1997, the day of Diana's death. "We have failed her," the Queen had inscribed. "Not through words, but through the unarticulated. I will not forget her legacy." Underneath it was a personal letter. "Anne," it said, "you consistently perceived beyond the distractions. You maintained your position while others lost sight of it. Thank you for safeguarding the crown from inside, discreetly, resolutely, and without recompense." A silver locket encased in velvet lay in the bottom of the box. Inside were two little portraits, one of Diana resplendent in her youth, and one of Elizabeth shone in her latter years. It was more than a mere memento. It was a torch, transmitted silently from one custodian of the monarchy's essence to another. With the gates closing behind Camilla, a new chapter commenced, one in which the Queen's genuine intentions would endure not in legal texts, but in the steadfast integrity of her most loyal confidants. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know your thoughts, and goodbye for now.